Welcome back to the program. Let's keep rolling. So it is being whispered loudly that the smear campaign against Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense is coming from the office of Senator Joni Ernst, who apparently wants the gig for herself. Well, here she is talking about transgender military members.
So the example of transgender people serving in our military. We have transgender people serving in our military. They will bleed red just as the rest of us. But I also take a stance that we should not be integrating transgender people into certain situations where it does make, if you have a female barracks and you have a transgender woman who has not transitioned, we shouldn't make the rest of the unit uncomfortable about that setting. There are certain accommodations we can make for that transgender individual. But if they bring value to our unit, if they have specialties that we can use, especially if we want to maintain an all-volunteer force, we want to bring that talent into our services. And I know that's controversial.
Military members go through rigorous psychological evaluations, and gender dysphoria is a mental illness, period. But there is Senator Ernst both accepting this concept and now promoting it while running a smear campaign against Pete Hegseth. Now, Elizabeth Troutman from the Daily Signal went to the Supreme Court the other day while the oral arguments were going on, and she interviewed a parent of an alleged trans kid and asked her, at what age do kids understand their gender?
Age do you think most trans kids determine that they're trans?
Violet told us when she was 1.5. She's been telling us since she could speak. So she knew since birth.
Since birth. This is the same mother who went on CNN with her son and put her son on display with irrational fears of being assassinated.
One day, I'm gonna be walking down the street and somebody's gonna come up and like shoot me or something.
That's a really scary thing to be worrying about at 10 years old.
Yeah, that should not be a worry.
Michelle, what's going through your mind as you hear your daughter say this?
It's just hard to hear her say that. And she asked me three questions after she heard who won the election. Are we gonna have to move? Are they gonna take me away from you? And am I not gonna be able to get my medicine?
Okay, joining me now is Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell from the Daily Signal. Elizabeth, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I've interviewed Prisha Mosley, Kat Cattinson, Chloe Cole, and several other detransitioners. And one of the things they pointed to was the mother on the TV show I Am Jazz, and how it seemed like the mother relished in being feted, being almost celebrated, almost we all have to get to know this mother. And it seems like some of these parents are downright narcissistic, that they're using their children to get attention.
That totally seems like that is what is happening in this clip. It is clear that this woman wanted her son to be a little girl from the time that he was a baby. If at the age of 1.5, this woman decided that my son is actually going to be a little girl and I'm going to transition my son throughout his entire life and have him live as a girl, she let him make that decision when he was a baby, way too young to even have an idea about how he would end up as an adult. And we can see that she's really used this for a lot of attention, going on CNN, huge TV show, to share the story of her child and to share what it's like to be the mother of a so-called transgender child. And it's clear that she has done a lot to make her son feel very, very afraid for his life. Normal 10-year-olds are not worried about the outcome of presidential elections. Normal 10-year-olds are not afraid they're going to get shot in the street. It's clear that this has been fed to him from a very young age by his mother.
1.5 years old. I got 3 kids. At 1.5 years old, we were still playing peekaboo, right? Like they were playing with their primary color toys at that point. They weren't discussing their life going forward and their the possibility that they might be born in the wrong body. What kind of magical linguistic skills did this 1.5-year-old have?
That was my thought exactly. I have no idea. Is actually a transgender psychologist out there who is associating certain behaviors with being transgender, which are actually just totally normal things for kids to do. An example of that is the psychologist said that if a little girl has a barrette in her hair and she pulls that barrette out, that might mean that she's really a boy. And so I'm guessing that these parents were reading those type of ideas, and that's what gave them the idea that their child is transgender. Also possible they just would rather have a daughter than a son, or that they just knew this would lead to a life of attention. A speaker at the rally said that having a transgender child made her way more interesting. And so I think, like you've said, it's clear that these parents are getting a lot of attention for having transgender children.
I just went over my monologue and I said this on my radio program that kids are, you want to talk about who's the most susceptible to propaganda, it's children. They tend to want to please the adults in their lives. And I said, I don't wish this on any parent, but if you were to change out trans and let's say start throwing parties for kids simply because they were in a wheelchair, and I'm not trying to, hurt the feelings of any kid who needs a wheelchair. But if you were to go into classrooms of kindergartners, first graders, and throw a party and make a big deal and make that child the center of attention, you've even seen this at children's birthdays. There are some kids that get jealous of the birthday boy or the birthday girl. If you make this something to celebrate, there are kids that want what they see the other kids having, right? They see the kid with the biggest piece of cake. They see the kid getting the most attention. Conceivably, if you were promoting being in a wheelchair as something to be celebrated, kids would want to be in a wheelchair. Now, if a kid identified as disabled and you took your child to a doctor and said, well, my son identifies as being disabled, so we're gonna amputate his legs, the doctor would say you're crazy. But we're doing that every day with children's genitalia.
You're completely right. I remember when I was a little kid, I would get jealous of the other kids on the playground. If they fell down, they'd get a treat from the teacher. That really seems like that's what's happening here. Violet never had a chance at being a boy, at being able to live out a life with his God-given gender. His parents decided from a very young age that he would be a girl. He would start taking these hormones that would likely make him infertile if he were to change his mind, and have terrible, irreversible health side effects that are really hard to go back once you've taken those for years and years. And I think that it's very clear here that Violet is a victim of transgender ideology that is being pushed on him by his parents from a very, very young age.
Look, the Supreme Court in the end is not going to decide whether or not gender is biological or a social construct. They're not going to do that. What they're ultimately going to decide is similar to Dobbs, is whether or not states have the police power over these surgeries being performed in their state jurisdictions. And ultimately, the Supreme Court likely is going to say, like gambling or lots of other things that states regulate, whether you like it or not, this is the state power. You don't have to like it, but it is the 10th Amendment. And that's likely where this is going to go.
It seemed like that to me from the questions the justices were asking in oral arguments, particularly Justice Kavanaugh, who said that the justices would have to choose between two different types of harm in order to rule on behalf of the plaintiff in this case. He was saying that no matter what, someone's going to be harmed if they rule on behalf of allowing transgender procedures for kids, allowing states to allow transgender procedures for kids, then that will harm the kids who are going to undergo these procedures and then later regret it. And then if they say that states can't ban transgender procedures for kids, then that's going to have kids who are taking hormones feel distressed about that. And so it seemed like Kavanaugh was leaning towards thinking that that is not a decision that the court can make and that it should be left up to the states.
But the bottom line is, I think a decade or two from now, we're going to look back and we are going to be embarrassed at the number of kids who regret this. It's irreversible. You cannot return mammary glands or a penis and testicles once they're removed. I mean, and the hormone therapy is also, it's irreversible. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
All right, you know how we wrap things up. We're going to do it next. It's Stuff Democrats Say, and my final rant. We'll wrap up business next.